Every day, billions of people around the world buy coffee or pay at supermarkets with nothing more than a quick tap of the card in their wallet. No swiping, no inserting, and strangely enough, there is not even a battery inside the card itself. Yet in less than a second, the card can still communicate with the payment terminal, generate a one-time security code, and approve the transaction almost instantly. So what actually happens in the exact moment you tap your card? And why is this technology considered much safer than old magnetic stripe cards? Today, we are uncovering the hidden technology behind Tap to Pay. For many years, bank cards were basically just plastic cards with a black magnetic stripe on the back. Every time you swiped the card, the payment terminal would read the exact same set of data stored permanently inside that stripe. It made payments fast and convenient, but it also turned older cards into perfect targets for data theft and card cloning all around the world. That is why tiny computer chips and tap-to-pay technology began to appear. Today, with just a brief tap, the card inside your wallet can silently communicate with the payment terminal and verify a transaction almost instantly. But behind that moment that seems so simple is an entire invisible system of technology working together at the same time. Beneath the thin plastic layer of a modern bank card is actually a miniature electronic system. The gold chip on the front is not just a place to store information. It works more like a tiny computer that can process data and perform encryption during a payment. Inside that chip is an extremely small processor, secure memory, and a simple operating system designed to handle transactions. Around the edges of the card, there is also an ultra-thin antenna loop that is almost invisible. This is the part that allows the card to communicate with the payment terminal using short-range radio waves. And most importantly, this chip does not send the same data every time like old magnetic stripe cards did. Instead, it can generate a completely new security code for every single transaction. When you bring your card close to a payment terminal, both devices immediately begin communicating through short-range radio waves. The card reader inside the POS terminal creates a small electromagnetic field, and that energy is what briefly powers the chip inside the card. Almost instantly, the system begins the transaction verification process. The card generates a unique encrypted code specifically for that payment and sends it to the terminal. The data is then forwarded to the bank for verification and approval before the transaction is completed. The entire process usually takes less than a second, so fast that for most people it simply feels like a quick little tap against the payment machine. Before today, how did you think Tap to Pay actually worked? And if you still remember the old days of swiping cards and signing paper receipts by hand, share your most interesting story down in the comments. One of the strangest things about Tap to Pay is that the card inside your wallet does not actually contain a battery or its own power source. It never needs charging, never needs to be turned on, and spends almost all of its time essentially asleep. The chip inside the card only becomes active for a few brief moments when it is placed near a payment terminal. This works through an extremely short-range form of wireless power transfer. The POS terminal creates a small electromagnetic field, and the antenna inside the card captures a tiny amount of that energy to power the chip during the transaction. In other words, the card is not powering itself. Instead, every time you tap to pay, it is temporarily borrowing energy directly from the payment terminal. With older magnetic stripe cards, every payment was basically just sending the exact same set of data over and over again. That also meant If someone managed to steal the information once, they could often reuse it almost indefinitely. But modern chip cards work in a completely different way. Every time you tap your card to pay, the chip inside creates a brand new security code specifically for that single transaction. The code is only valid for a very short moment before becoming useless. That means even if a hacker intercepts the payment data during the transaction, they can rarely use it again for another purchase. And that is exactly what makes creating fake cards today far more difficult than it was in the past. When tap-to-pay technology first became popular, many people worried that hackers could secretly scan the card inside their wallet from a distance without them noticing. And because the card uses radio waves, that fear actually sounded pretty reasonable at first. But in reality, the operating range of this technology is extremely short. In most cases, the card has to be placed very close to the payment terminal, usually just a few centimeters away, for a transaction to work at all. On top of that, the system also requires a verification process between the card and the reader before any meaningful data is exchanged. So even if someone tried to intercept the signal from a distance, it would be extremely difficult for them to obtain enough usable information to perform a real transaction. And that is one of the biggest reasons why tap-to-pay is far safer than many people originally thought. Many people assume the payment only happens between the card and the POS terminal. But in reality, the most important part of the entire system happens behind the scenes. The moment you tap your card, the transaction data is sent through a massive financial network connecting banks, stores, and companies like Visa and MasterCard. At that point, the bank immediately checks multiple things almost at the same time: whether the security code is valid, whether the transaction looks suspicious, and whether the account is approved for payment. Meanwhile, Visa and MasterCard act like giant middlemen that help move the data between thousands of different banking systems all around the world. And the incredible part is that this entire process is usually completed in less than a second before the payment terminal finally displays the word "approved." But have you ever wondered what would happen if the internet suddenly disappeared right when you were paying with your card? In reality, some modern payment terminals can still process small transactions even during a temporary network outage. That is because many modern payment systems are designed with an offline processing mode for low-value purchases. The POS terminal can temporarily approve certain payments based on preset security limits before sending the transaction data to the bank later, once the connection is restored. Of course, this does not apply to every situation. For larger transactions or payments considered high risk, the system still needs a direct connection to the bank for real-time verification. Most people have experienced that awkward moment when their account still has money, but the payment terminal suddenly displays the word "declined." In reality, modern payment systems do much more than simply check your account balance. Every transaction is analyzed using multiple factors almost instantly. The bank may evaluate the payment location, the type of store, the transaction amount, or even your normal spending habits to detect unusual activity. If the system notices something suspicious, the payment can be temporarily blocked even if there is still enough money in the account. And sometimes, the very reason your card gets declined is because the system is quietly trying to protect your account from fraudulent transactions. The interesting thing is that today's tap-to-pay technology is probably only the beginning. In many parts of the world, smartphones, smartwatches, and even smart rings are already starting to replace traditional plastic cards. Some companies are also experimenting with fingerprint sensors built directly into payment cards, along with security codes that can automatically change every few hours. In the future, payments may become even more invisible. Instead of pulling out a wallet or taking a card from your pocket, systems could automatically recognize users through wearable devices or biometric data. And perhaps the strangest part is that all of this incredibly complex technology is slowly becoming just another normal part of everyday life. Perhaps the strangest thing about tap-to-pay technology is not that we can pay with just a single tap. It is the fact that billions of people are using an incredibly complex system of encryption and wireless communication every single day without almost ever thinking about it. Inside the thin card sitting in your wallet is a tiny chip capable of processing data, generating a unique security code for every transaction, and communicating with an entire global banking network in less than a second. And all of it happens so quietly that, for most of us, the only thing we actually feel is a light little tap against the payment terminal. And if you were surprised to discover how much technology is hidden behind such an ordinary everyday action, leave a comment below. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to keep exploring the strange stories hidden behind the familiar things around us.